My name is Summer Batterby, and this is my story about anxiety. It wasn't until I was a junior in college that I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. And it wasn't until I was a junior in high school that I even had a word for the perpetual nervousness and uneasiness that I'd been feeling for most of my life. It all started when I was in 11th grade in the fall of 2010 when I was tested for learning disabilities at my school. And when you do the testing, if it comes back that you have some sort of learning disability, they want you to go see the school psychologist to talk about how that's going to impact your learning and how it sort of impacts how you think of yourself. So I went and I had a meeting with her, and I remember her saying that she could see that I was dealing with a lot of anxiety. And when she said that, I looked at her and I was like, I don't think I am. I never felt anxiety before. I don't know what that is. And she said, well, do you feel this way, and this way? And I said, well, yeah. She's like, well, that's called anxiety. And I was like, oh, so that's what this nervousness and uneasiness that I've been feeling for as long as I can remember, like, that's what that is. So she told me that she thought that I should go and get help from a therapist or go see a counselor to sort of talk about where that was coming from and how best to deal with that. And I said, okay, thank you. And at the end of our meeting, I left and never told anyone that she had said that, because this idea of being the girl in high school with anxiety was something that I didn't want. There was this stigma behind mental illness and mental health that you were automatically the weird girl or the girl who couldn't control her feelings, and I didn't want to be that. So I was involved with the youth group at my church all throughout high school, and I would go twice a week, and my mom would always tell me that I needed to go, but some days I just didn't want to and just felt so uncomfortable being there, even though I'd been going there for 4 years. And I would go and participate in the group activities, but felt really uncomfortable being in a group. And there was always this pressure to go to camp and go to these big group events and always be involved. That was a pressure that if you weren't doing that, then you were different. And because of the anxiety that I felt, being involved in groups was uncomfortable, and going away to camp caused a lot of separation anxiety in me that I didn't want to be away from my family that long. So this just continued for the next 6 years, where I was feeling anxiety, and some days it was better than others, but I noticed it was perpetually getting worse and worse, and I felt like it was never going to get any better, and just continued to start to consume my life more and more. And in the fall of 2016, it all came to a point where I wasn't able to control it anymore, and it was starting to take over my life. I didn't want to go to school. Couldn't sleep at night, and I would always be thinking about interactions I had and what people were thinking about me and what I did wrong. And I got to a point where I wasn't feeling God, and my relationship with God was starting to be something that I didn't even think was real anymore. And being a ministry major in school, there's this pressure to have this relationship with God that's always growing, and you're always wanting to spend time with God. But I was getting to a point where I didn't feel God and couldn't think about growing that relationship because I was so consumed with every action I did and every word that I said that I couldn't focus on anything outside of my own thoughts. And so one day I was meeting with my mentor at school, and I had mentioned something to her about struggling with my faith and not being able to sleep and things like that. And she said, oh, do you have anxiety? And I was like, no, like this word anxiety, this stigma comes with it. And I didn't have that. I didn't want to claim that I had that, because then I was going to be that girl. And that girl was terrifying because of the anxiety that I felt of drawing attention to myself. And as soon as I got that label of anxiety, I was going to draw attention to myself. And so she had told me that she thought it'd be a good idea if I went to the counseling center at school And I said, okay, I will make an appointment and I'll go. And she said, okay, cool. Like, I think it'll be good for you. And the next week she said, how was therapy? And I said, I didn't call to make an appointment and I didn't go because I didn't want to be the girl that possibly had anxiety and had to go to counseling to talk about her feelings because she couldn't do it herself. And I didn't want people to think that there was something wrong with me. So that day she called the counseling center for me. We made an appointment and she told me that the next day she was going to be meeting me outside the counseling center for my appointment, and that if I wasn't there, I was going to be letting her down and she was going to feel like I let her down. So the next day I went and I met her there, and I went to my first therapy appointment, my first time sort of telling someone how I had really been feeling and how long I'd been feeling this anxiety. That was in November of last year, and so I've been going to counseling now at the counseling center for about 8-ish months, and it wasn't until 2 months of going to counseling that he had told me that he would think it was a good idea if I started some anti-anxiety medication so that I could start to live my life normally again and that I wouldn't be so focused on my anxiety all the time. So I did that, and it wasn't until a month that I had been taking this medication and 2 months of even going to therapy at school that I had told my parents about any of this. And my parents, who are marriage and family therapists, are very much in favor for mental health and therapy and doing what you need to have a healthy mental health. And so I told them, in fear that they would think that their daughter had something wrong with her or that their daughter was crazy, but they told me that the steps that I had taken were what I needed to do and that they were happy that I was doing these things. And so over these past 6 months of being on anti-anxiety medication, I've been able to find a balance of what it means to start to feel God again, and in those moments where it's hard to feel God, how I can start to recognize that my faith is more than the thoughts going on in my head that are taking over. My current struggle with it all is that when I tell people at church or when I tell people who are in the faith community about my anxiety, I hear a lot of that I should cast my anxieties on God. And that would make sense for me to do if I was worried about getting into a school or worried about a certain situation. But when it's an anxiety that takes over your whole life, there's no way to cast it on God because I don't feel God in that moment, and the anxiety is all I feel. The struggle of people understanding about anxiety and mental illness and the benefits of medication has been something that I've started to realize is a big stigma in the church, and I try to explain it to people that it's how I'm able to get to a place where I can continue my faith. But it is something that there's still a lot of stigma with in the church, and that I'm learning to talk to people about and help them understand. But for the past 7 months, my mental health has been better than it's ever been, and it's because of the medication and the therapy that I've been going to. John Swinton talking about taking medication as a spiritual discipline was something that I've never really heard before, and his analogy of you take pain medication when you're in pain because if you have an illness, you take medication, and mental illness you need medication for. Taking medication for anxiety is a spiritual discipline that I'm realizing is something that I need to take seriously, and that I don't think a lot of people realize is more than just taking a pill to make your brain function normally, but it's something that you're doing so that you can continue to grow your relationship with God. And that wasn't something I've really thought about until I heard him talking about it. But I really started to realize that there's a connection between taking pain medicine because you're in pain and taking some sort of anti-anxiety medication or antidepressant because you're feeling these feelings, that it's the same thing, but people look at it so differently. If I could say one thing to young girls or young adult women who are feeling anxiety and scared of what people might think about them and the stigma behind that, I would tell them that it's a lot easier to just get the help that you need and find someone that you can be honest with and vulnerable with, so that you can get the help that you need, because the longer you wait, it's just going to continue to build and get to a point where it'll take over and have a lot of effects on your life that you never thought would be there. And so the sooner that you can just talk to someone about it and figure out what helps you through the times of anxiety, it will be much more beneficial than waiting because you think you can do it on your own. Within a youth group, I think the leaders always have the intention of building strong relationships with the students, and they want to be able to have an impact on the kids that they're involved with. I think one of the most important things that they can do is invest in those relationships, because when students feel like there's an adult that really cares about them and invested in them, they'll be more honest. And when it comes to things like anxiety and depression, and they're in those settings within the youth group that they're uncomfortable with, if they don't feel like they have that relationship with a leader in the group, then they're likely not going to say anything and just kind of be uncomfortable and not enjoying anything that's going on, no matter how much work that you put into it as a leader. Continuing to be there for the students and to have some sort of open discussion within the group about mental health, and that there's no stigma within your group about it, and regardless of whatever you're going through, whether it's physical or mental, that it's all valid, and just continuing to validate what they're feeling, whether they say it or not, whether it's in their actions or within the words that they use. Just being aware of their words and their actions, and if they say they don't want to participate in this big group game, not making it this big deal of saying, oh, so-and-so didn't want to play the game, so they're going to sit over there, but just go sit with them and don't play the game yourself, or just try to draw as little attention to them and to the situation that you can, because the more attention that's there, the more anxious that they're going to feel about the situation. I don't know what it's like being a parent and having a kid who may start acting differently one day or start showing signs of anxiety, but I imagine that you'd be able to tell. And I'd say to parents that if you're starting to notice these things, don't be too intrusive with your questions and don't be so forceful, and just start to inquire how their day's been a little more and things like that, and be vulnerable with them about your mental health. And if there's been a history of mental health illness in your family, if there's been a history of that, then talk to them about that and have that conversation, because if they're starting to feel those things and starting to have anxiety or depression come up in their lives, they'll be much more open to talking to you about it, instead of never hearing you say anything about it, or never having that conversation of it's okay for you to feel this way, and it's okay and it's normal for this to happen, and there's things that we can do to help you through it. But if there's never any conversation, or it's just sort of expected that they're going to come to you and say something, there's a good chance that they won't. And so not being the parent that's always drilling into them and asking them, how are you feeling, but having a conversation with them of, this has been in our family, or I felt this way, and I just want you to know that it's normal for this, and we want to be there and help you through it. But in doing it in a way that shows that you love them, and that whatever they come to you with, isn't going to make you look at them any differently.